I'm Tucker, and you are in Last Moments. Join me as we uncover the most horrifying amusement park deaths ever, from riders who ignored restraints just to get a photo, to thrill seekers who forced their way onto rides they were clearly warned to avoid. It was July 15, 2014, at a regional amusement park outside Sandusky, Ohio. By mid-morning, heat and humidity had already settled over the property as summer crowds filled the walkways. The park's newest attraction, a steel roller coaster called Iron Viper, dominated the skyline near the rear section of the grounds. Rising just over 170 feet, the ride had opened earlier that season and was marketed as the park's most intense experience to date. Daniel Morales, 34, entered the park shortly after opening with his two daughters, ages 8 and 10. He worked as a construction foreman and was known among co-workers for being meticulous about safety procedures. This trip had taken nearly a year of saving and planning, and it was the girls' first visit to a large amusement park. Both children met the posted height requirement for Iron Viper, though the younger of the two cleared it by less than an inch. As they moved through the queue, Daniel paid close attention to ride operations. Trains were dispatched every 2 minutes, with attendants visually checking over the shoulder restraints before each departure. The ride used a ratcheting restraint system designed to lock automatically when pulled down, paired with a secondary seatbelt. Due to high guest volume that morning, attendants were moving quickly to maintain throughput. The family was seated in the third row of a 7-car train. Daniel ensured both children's restraints were lowered, tugging on them before securing his own. Unknown to riders, one restraint sensor on that train had been intermittently misreading its locked position during earlier cycles. In addition, wear inside the restraint's ratcheting mechanism prevented the locking teeth from fully seating, a condition that had not yet triggered a system fault, allowing the train to continue operating. The train ascended the lift hill without incident. At the crest, it slowed briefly before tipping into the initial drop, where the train reached speeds exceeding 65 miles per hour. As the force of the descent pressed riders into their seats, Daniel's restraint shifted upward several inches. The faulty sensor and worn locking components allowed the restraint to appear secured, despite never achieving full mechanical engagement. Near the bottom of the first drop, the sudden change in forces caused the restraint to lose effective engagement under load. Daniel was lifted from his seat and thrown forward within the car. His upper body struck the steel edge of the restraint frame before he was partially ejected from the train, remaining entangled only briefly before falling into a fenced maintenance access area beneath the track. Ride operators initiated an emergency stop within seconds, as witnesses along the track alerted staff. The train came to a halt further along the course, and riders were evacuated. Park emergency teams reached the impact area quickly and began life-saving measures. Daniel was found unresponsive with catastrophic head and chest injuries. He was transported to a nearby trauma center, but was pronounced dead shortly after arrival due to severe blunt force trauma. His daughters were physically unharmed and were treated for shock. The subsequent investigation determined the cause was a restraint locking failure linked to a faulty position sensor that had not been detected during morning checks. Inspectors concluded the accident was preventable and ordered the immediate shutdown of Iron Viper. The ride remained closed pending regulatory review, mechanical redesign, and updated inspection procedures across the park. It was September 1st, 2018. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across a popular theme park in Orange County, California, where crowds gathered for Labor Day weekend festivities. Derek Collins, a 21-year-old engineering student, stood in line for the log flume ride with 4 college friends, visibly intoxicated and laughing too loudly. Derek wasn't a troublemaker by nature, but he had developed a dangerous drinking pattern during his 3 years at a state university. Friends described him as intelligent but impulsive when drunk, someone who took dares too seriously and craved attention. That afternoon, Derek had consumed approximately 8 beers and 3 shots of whiskey over 4 hours at a nearby parking lot tailgate party before entering the park. His blood alcohol content would later be measured at 0.19, more than twice the legal limit. Log flume rides are deceptively simple attractions where passengers sit in hollowed-out artificial logs that float through water channels before plunging down steep drops at speeds reaching 40 miles per hour. The rides feature minimal restraint systems or lap bars designed to keep riders seated during the descent, but they are not always secured. Park regulations explicitly prohibit intoxicated guests from boarding any rides, with trained staff positioned to identify impaired visitors. Derek's flushed face and unsteady gait should have been obvious warning signs. At 4:15 in the afternoon, Derek and his friends approached the ride entrance. The teenage ride operator noticed Derek's unsteady gait but misjudged the level of his impairment and continued loading the next log. Derek climbed into the front seat of a 6-person log, his friends filling in behind him, one already recording video on his phone. As the log began its slow climb up the 42-foot lift hill, Derek started joking about standing up. His friends laughed, encouraging him. The ride's drop photo and nearby CCTV later showed Derek shifting forward and rising in the log as it crested the lift. The ride operator radioed security, but the log had already reached the top of the drop. Derek stood partially upright just as the log tipped over the edge, accelerating down the 50-degree incline. His alcohol-impaired balance failed completely. Instead of sitting back down, he pitched forward over the front of the log. His friends' laughter turned to screams as Derek tumbled over the nose of the vessel at approximately 38 miles per hour. Derek's body was projected forward over the nose of the log, veering left as it cleared the channel and struck the concrete apron beside the runout pool. His body went limp instantly, sliding into the shallow runout water as his friend's log splashed down behind him. Other riders began screaming as streaks of blood clouded the runout water. The ride operator hit the emergency stop within seconds and called park security at 4:18 in the afternoon. Paramedics arrived by 4:24 in the afternoon, but Derek showed no signs of life. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The autopsy revealed massive skull fracture, severe brain laceration, and catastrophic subdural hemorrhage. Death was instantaneous from blunt force trauma. A friend had filmed the incident on a phone, and police seized the device and made a forensic copy. The friend later deleted any social uploads. The park halted alcohol sales for the night, expanded sobriety checks at entry, retrained staff, and pledged to work with local regulators on tougher enforcement. Derek's death prompted stricter enforcement protocols across the amusement park. It was May 21, 2015, at a local amusement park in Staffordshire. Morning operations were routine as a gravity-driven mine train coaster cycled through a low stone tunnel. Inspections showed no faults, and the ride had already completed dozens of runs without incident. Mark Ellison was 21, a college student from Derbyshire spending the afternoon with a woman he had been dating for only a few weeks. He had talked up the park on the drive over, joking about how tame most of the rides were and how he never got nervous on coasters. Friends later said he liked showing confidence in front of dates, especially on thrill rides. When they reached the mine train, he waved it off as slow and harmless, then suggested they ride anyway just to warm up. They boarded near the middle of the train. Mark pulled the lap bar down and glanced back at the rows behind them as the train rolled out of the station. The lift hill carried them toward the first tunnel. Ahead, the front cars slowed unexpectedly near the crest. An automatic sensor detected a spacing problem and triggered an emergency stop. For several seconds, the train sat motionless, half on the lift and half beyond it. Then the chain released. Without enough momentum to crest the hill, the train began to roll backward under its own weight. At first, the movement was slow. Riders felt the shift as gravity pulled them into their seats. The cars crept into a narrow themed mine tunnel, built only for forward-moving trains. Inside, the rock ceiling curved low over the track, leaving only safe clearance for riders who remained fully seated. As the rollback continued, the speed increased. Some riders grabbed their restraints. Mark twisted his shoulders, trying to see what was happening behind them. Still buckled, he pushed upward against the lap bar and lifted his torso to look back down the tunnel. The motion raised his head several inches above the safe-seated position, placing it into the tunnel's clearance envelope. Security cameras later showed the moment clearly. As the train passed beneath the lowest beam, the backward motion drove Mark's skull into the concrete ceiling. The impact forced his neck violently forward and down, compressing the upper vertebrae. His body collapsed instantly, dropping limp against the seat as the train continued rolling. Less than a second later, the rear section of the train struck the stalled front cars. The jolt sent riders forward into their restraints and into each other. Mark's head snapped sideways under the force, his body unmoving. Emergency brakes engaged and stopped the train inside the tunnel. Operators reached the cars within moments and unlocked the restraints. Mark showed no breathing and no response. Paramedics arrived within minutes and began resuscitation attempts on the platform. No pulse was detected. He was pronounced dead shortly after being transported to the hospital. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death a high cervical spine fracture. The initial ceiling strike had severed the spinal cord at the base of the skull, stopping breathing and heart regulation instantly. Investigators determined the rollback was a routine emergency response, and that the fatal injury occurred when Mark lifted himself out of the seated position. The death was ruled an accident caused by unsafe rider movement. The coaster reopened weeks later, with additional warning signs reminding riders to remain seated at all times. It was December 19, 2013. The sprawling amusement park on the outskirts of Bengaluru hummed with the excited chatter of families and corporate groups celebrating the holiday season, while the towering steel structure of the roller coaster cast long shadows across the crowded walkways below. Arvind Malhotra, 34, had worked in textile sales for over a decade, building relationships with garment manufacturers throughout Karnataka. His colleagues described him as confident to the point of arrogance, someone who believed rules applied to everyone except him. He took pride in his ability to talk his way out of any situation, and frequently boasted about cutting corners to close deals faster than his competitors. That afternoon, his company had organized a team-building event at the amusement park, and Arvind had positioned himself as the fearless leader who would demonstrate how to properly enjoy the rides without being constrained by excessive safety measures. The specific roller coaster in this incident was a high-speed steel coaster featuring individual sled-style cars that navigated sharp turns and steep drops at speeds exceeding 45 miles per hour. Each car was equipped with a T-shaped lap bar restraint designed to lock securely across the hips and a secondary safety belt designed to keep riders positioned during high G maneuvers. The ride's most challenging section included a descending helix, where centrifugal forces could lift riders upward against their restraints. Safety protocols required operators to check both the lap bar and belt on every passenger, with specific attention to loose clothing that might interfere with proper restraint positioning. The ride lacked electronic lap bar sensors, so operators had no automatic warning if a passenger tampered with the belt. Arvind had chosen to wear a traditional kurta for the company outing, and the loose-fitting garment bunched uncomfortably under his safety belt when the ride operator secured his restraints. Rather than asking for assistance or adjusting his clothing before boarding, Arvind waited until the operator moved to the next passenger, then deliberately loosened his safety belt to relieve the pressure from the bunched fabric. He relied solely on the lap bar, likely convinced that the belt was an unnecessary backup system. As the coaster began its ascent, Arvind's co-workers noticed his loosened belt but assumed he knew what he was doing. The first several turns and drops proceeded normally, with Arvind laughing loudly and raising his arms to show his fearlessness. However, as the train entered the descending helix at maximum speed, the combination of centrifugal force and gravitational pull created upward lift that the lap bar alone couldn't counteract. His loose kurta provided no friction against the smooth plastic seat, and his deliberately loosened belt offered no resistance. During the helix's steepest banking, Arvind's body lifted completely out of his seat. The lap bar, designed to work in conjunction with the safety belt, couldn't prevent him from sliding underneath as centrifugal force pulled him upward and outward. He was ejected from his sled at approximately 40 miles per hour, rotating uncontrollably as his body tumbled through the air before colliding with the ride's steel support structure. The impact with the first beam broke his ribs and punctured his lungs, but his momentum continued carrying him downward through the framework. Arvin's body struck 3 more steel supports during his 60-foot fall, each impact causing additional trauma as he tumbled and rotated violently through the coaster's superstructure, consistent with high-velocity impacts on rigid steel. His co-workers in trailing cars witnessed the entire sequence, hearing the distinctive metallic impacts as his body collided with the framework. Visible blood smears marked his path down the steel beams. Security cameras on the ride platform captured his ejection and initial impacts, providing investigators with a clear sequence of the accident. The ride's emergency systems automatically stopped the train, and park security called emergency services within 2 minutes. Paramedics arrived in 7 minutes but found Arvin had died on impact from massive internal injuries. The medical examiner determined that death resulted from multiple blunt force trauma and complete rupture of internal organs, occurring within seconds of the initial impact. His injuries were consistent with high-velocity collision with rigid steel structures. The park immediately implemented enhanced restraint checking procedures, added multilingual safety warnings specifically addressing loose clothing, and introduced mandatory rider orientation for larger groups. Arvin's company established new policies prohibiting employees from tampering with safety equipment during corporate events. It was August 7, 2016. A day meant for family fun turned into an unimaginable tragedy at Schlitterbahn Water Park in Kansas City. The Schwab family, residents of Kansas, had visited the park for elected official day, when public officials and their families were granted free admission. Michelle and Scott Schwab, along with their 4 sons, were excited to spend the day enjoying the water rides, but it was their 10-year-old son, Caleb, who was the most eager. Little did they know that this day would end in a devastating loss. Caleb, the second of the Schwab's 4 children, had always been full of energy and curiosity. His parents, especially his father, Kansas State Representative Scott Schwab, were eager to give their children a memorable summer day. Caleb, with his older brother Nathan, set his sights on the park's most thrilling attraction, the Verricht water slide. Towering at 168 feet, Verricht held the title of the world's tallest water slide, a feat of engineering that had captivated thrill seekers since its opening. The ride had no age restrictions, and Caleb, at just 10 years old, was allowed to ride despite his small stature. He and Nathan climbed the 264 steps to the top of Verricht, joining the line of eager riders. Caleb, weighing only 73 pounds, took the front seat of a 3-person raft with 2 women seated behind him. Nathan had already completed the ride and waited for his younger brother at the bottom, unaware that a tragedy was about to unfold. As Caleb's raft descended the slide, everything seemed normal until the raft went airborne over the second hill. The weight distribution, combined with the ride's high speed, caused the raft to lift off the slide surface. Caleb was forcefully thrown into the safety netting, where he struck a metal pole. The impact was fatal. He suffered catastrophic injuries on the spot. Witnesses below watched in horror as the raft, along with Caleb's lifeless body, completed its descent. Nathan, just 12 years old, saw the horrifying accident unfold in front of him. He screamed in terror, his voice rising above the chaos. He flew from the Verrucht. He flew from the Verrucht. Their mother, Michelle, rushed to reach Caleb, but bystanders held her back, fearing the devastating sight would be too much for her to bear. There was a gentleman who wouldn't allow me to come close enough to see what was going on, Michelle later recalled. He just kept saying, "Trust me, you don't want to go any further." Meanwhile, Scott Schwab repeatedly asked in disbelief if his son was truly dead, grappling with the sudden and overwhelming loss. The aftermath of Caleb's death plunged the family into grief and disbelief. In the days that followed, an investigation into the circumstances surrounding the incident revealed shocking safety failures. Verrucht, although a marvel to onlookers, had been plagued with safety concerns long before Caleb's tragic ride. The slide's design and construction were carried out by individuals without any formal engineering expertise. Instead, they relied on trial and error methods, a dangerous gamble for a ride of such magnitude. Further investigation revealed that Caleb's light weight in the front of the raft contributed to the disaster, as it created an imbalance. This wasn't the first time that Raft B, the specific raft Caleb rode in, had gone airborne. In fact, it had a history of speeding abnormally fast and lifting off the slide, but no significant changes were made to correct the issue. Even more concerning was the improper use of Velcro seatbelts, which had reportedly come undone on previous rides. This lack of basic safety precautions contributed directly to Caleb's death. In 2017, the Schwab family settled with Schlitterbahn and other involved parties for approximately $20 million. The Verricht slide was dismantled, and Schlitterbahn, Kansas City closed permanently in 2018. Caleb's death was not merely a freak accident, but a preventable tragedy caused by negligence and safety failures, forever marking a day that should have been filled with laughter and joy. It was August 9, 2015, when 28-year-old Lila Chapman arrived at a seaside amusement park in Santa Cruz, California, with 3 co-workers for what should have been a perfect summer afternoon. Lila worked in food service and was known for her adventurous spirit, always the first to suggest trying new restaurants or activities. Her companions included Jenna, a 30-year-old server with an outgoing personality who could make friends anywhere, Omar, a 27-year-old warehouse worker whose meticulous nature made him notice details others missed, and Chris, a 31-year-old substitute educator whose cautious demeanor often balanced the group's more impulsive decisions. The group had received an unexpected afternoon off due to a last-minute schedule change and decided to hit the park's largest inverted roller coaster first. The weather was perfect with clear skies and a light coastal breeze, and the ride was running continuous cycles with no delays. As they approached the loading platform, Omar's keen eye caught a faint squeaking sound coming from their train during test dispatches, but operations continued normally. A small placard near the station read "Test cycle completed, cleared for operation," indicating recent maintenance work. What the riders didn't know was that morning maintenance had adjusted the over-the-shoulder restraint sensors, and this particular coaster model operated without secondary seatbelts. Lila was assigned to the front left seat. When the operator performed the routine push check, her harness latched at a lower detent than typical, creating a visibly larger chest clearance. A second operator confirmed restraint lights as part of the standard dual check procedure. However, the miscalibrated sensor registered this gap as acceptable, and the panel indicators showed all restraints verified, allowing dispatch. The train rolled out smoothly with the familiar sound of anti-rollback dogs clicking on the lift hill. After cresting the 180-foot drop, the coaster pulled high G-forces through a zero-G roll. During these early maneuvers, Lila's over-the-shoulder restraint exhibited slight upward movement within the latch mechanism due to vibration and the initial excessive gap. As the train entered the first vertical loop, peak upward acceleration occurred with riders inverted at the apex. The restraint's ratchet pawl, which had been marginally engaged due to the starting gap, allowed a momentary climb by one increment under the dynamic load. This small movement was enough to compromise the restraint's effectiveness. Lila's hips cleared the seat pan, and despite her forearms striking the seat wing, she separated completely from the restraint system. Her trajectory intersected with a support crossmember adjacent to the loop structure, before she impacted the ground within the restricted area below. The remaining riders immediately began shouting as they witnessed the horrific event unfold. The train continued its programmed course until reaching the next block break, where the operator executed an emergency stop. Emergency medical services arrived quickly and initiated advanced life support protocols, but Lila had sustained catastrophic blunt force trauma, including cervical spine dislocation, multiple rib fractures with lung injuries, severe traumatic brain injury, and rapid internal hemorrhaging. Despite all efforts, she was pronounced dead at the scene. The investigation revealed that the combination of the restraint position sensor and the absence of a secondary belt system on this coaster model had created the conditions for this tragedy. The root cause was traced to a tolerance stack-up in the restraint's position sensor calibration, which allowed the system to register a partially latched harness as fully secured. The affected train was immediately removed from service, and all restraint assemblies, sensor calibration records, and dispatch logs were secured as evidence. The park suspended operations on the ride pending a complete safety review and recalibration of all restraint systems. It was August 17, 2013, at a regional theme park in the southwestern United States. The late summer evening brought heavy crowds as temperatures cooled, and nighttime attractions began operating at full capacity. Elevated above the park's main concourse, an electric monorail looped continuously along a narrow concrete guideway, transporting guests between parking areas and the park's interior sections. 21-year-old Jason Moss arrived at the park shortly before closing with two friends after deciding not to purchase admission tickets. The group had spent most of the evening nearby and believed they could enter the park grounds by bypassing the ticketed gates near the monorail station. Jason had recently dropped out of community college and was working irregular construction jobs. Friends described him as impulsive and confident, often dismissing warnings as exaggerations. As the park began its closing procedures, the group moved toward a fenced maintenance corridor that ran parallel to the monorail's elevated track. Security staff noticed them entering a restricted area and immediately began shouting for them to stop and leave the zone. Jason ignored the warnings and climbed over a low barrier separating the walkway from the monorail guideway. The monorail system operated on a single-beam track with no pedestrian clearance. Power was supplied through electrified rails mounted along the beam, and the train's rubber-tired undercarriage wrapped tightly around the guideway during operation. Trains traveled at speeds up to 35 miles per hour and required several hundred feet to come to a complete stop once emergency braking was initiated. Jason stepped onto the narrow edge of the guideway and began moving forward, apparently believing he could cross the track before the next train arrived. Security personnel continued shouting, warning him that a train was approaching. Surveillance footage later showed the monorail rounding a curve less than 200 feet away, already committed to the section of track Jason had entered. The operator initiated emergency braking as soon as the obstruction was visible, but the distance was insufficient. The front of the train struck Jason from behind, knocking him off balance and pinning him against the concrete beam. He was dragged approximately 40 feet along the guideway before the train came to a controlled stop. Park emergency teams reached the scene within minutes. Jason was found beneath the front section of the monorail with catastrophic injuries to his torso and lower extremities. He was unresponsive and showed no signs of life. Paramedics pronounced him dead at the scene due to massive blunt force trauma and crush injuries. The monorail line was shut down immediately, and passengers aboard the train were evacuated safely using maintenance walkways. The park closed the affected section for the remainder of the night. The investigation determined that Jason had entered a clearly marked restricted area and ignored repeated verbal warnings from security personnel. Mechanical inspections found no faults with the monorail's braking system or visibility. Investigators concluded that the train operator followed proper emergency procedures, but could not stop in time due to the system's operating limits. The death was ruled accidental, caused by trespassing onto an active transit guideway. Following the incident, the park installed higher fencing along maintenance corridors and added additional warning signage near monorail infrastructure. No charges were filed against park staff or operators. It was June 15, 2017. The afternoon sun blazed over a major Southern California theme park, casting crisp shadows across the midway where families lined up for attractions promising harmless thrills. However, one summer shift would dissolve into tragedy before the cotton candy vendors finished restocking. 18-year-old Ethan Morales, a seasonal employee 3 weeks into a lead-in training role, had been instructed to keep the 3:20 p.m. rotation moving. Other colleagues were aware that Ethan wanted the supervisor's praise. He wanted to look competent in front of the crowd. He had a reputation among co-workers for being eager and a little too clever with shortcuts. He liked to joke that rules were suggestions, and he'd already earned praise from a manager for shaving 30 seconds off the queue time earlier that afternoon. The swing attraction was a rotating swing chair carousel with chain-hung seats, equipped with individual lap bars secured by a ratchet-locking powel. Lap bars were supposed to be tested with a firm push until resistance was felt. A click was heard, and a green indicator aligned. A small maintenance issue had nagged the ride for weeks. One lap bar on row 3 stuck intermittently, and the ratchet pawl showed surface corrosion at the hinge bolt. Maintenance had logged the note but taped a temporary warning tag to the control box and prioritized other repairs. The ride still passed daily inspections on paper because the sensor auto cutoff had been temporarily bypassed following repeated nuisance trips, an entry that, in the bustle, hadn't been verified by the supervisor that morning. As guests climbed in, Ethan juggled the loading drill like a circus act. Because he was trying to keep lines short and already had a broom tucked against the rear platform to sweep debris, he hit on what he thought was a brilliant time saver. Prop the problematic lap bar open with the broom handle so riders could slide in smoothly, then give it a quick shove to lock it in place. When the next cycle approached, there happened to be one empty seat in row 3. Someone shouted that the bar still needed testing. Without thinking through policy, without calling maintenance, and eager to prove the bar would click, Ethan climbed down into the empty bucket seat, jammed the broom handle between the lap bar and the seat lip, and pressed the bar with his foot until it engaged. He meant to sit for 5 seconds, and then hop out, test, then resume his station. A co-worker shouted a warning he didn't hear. A manager on the headset called for the cycle to start as the ride was cued. In the chaos, Ethan forgot the golden rule. Never be on the ride while it's about to start. The ride started. Centrifugal forces that normally kept secured riders in place worked against a lap bar propped from beneath. The broom, wedged at an angle and not designed to bear shear forces, began to slip almost immediately as the ride accelerated. The altered load path shifted dynamic shear onto the corroded ratchet pawl, which finally released on the 8th rotation. Ethan's hands scrabbled for the handles. The lap bar pivoted upward, then broke free. He was flung outward from a moving seat traveling about 12 feet before striking the fence that ringed the ride. The impact was catastrophic and immediate. A park EMT-trained first aid attendant stationed in the adjacent operations corridor reached the scene within moments and immediately recognized the severity. Paramedics arrived shortly and pronounced Ethan dead at 4:12 p.m. Park management shuttered the ride the same day. Regulators cited multiple violations after reviewing CCTV footage, control logs, and maintenance records. Disabled sensors, poor maintenance follow-through, inadequate supervisory verification, and unsafe operator behavior. The manager who'd urged faster cycles faced internal review for pushing throughput over procedure. The ride remained closed for months while refurbishment, retraining, and a full redesign of barrier protection and interlocks were completed. It was July 28, 2018, inside a horror tunnel ride at a large amusement park in Guangzhou, China. The afternoon was hot, lines were long, and the ride cycled continuously. Dim lighting, artificial fog, and loud sound effects masked small technical problems that blended easily into the attraction's intended chaos. Lin Xiao was 32 and worked as a retail clerk at a mid-range clothing store, spending most days on her feet, folding clothes, restocking shelves, and calming irritated customers. She lived modestly, rarely traveled, and had not taken a proper day off in nearly a year. The park visit was planned for a friend's birthday, meant to be light and forgettable. Lin wasn't chasing attention online. She only recorded short clips to send to friends, usually small moments to remember a rare outing. The horror tunnel was an indoor dark ride, built to look rundown on purpose. Exposed pipes, flickering lights, fake electrical panels, and dangling wires were part of the set design. Warning signs at the entrance instructed riders to remain seated, keep their hands inside the vehicle, and avoid touching props. Operators repeated the rules as cars loaded, but the line moved fast, and most riders treated it casually. Lin boarded a 2-row car with 3 friends. As the ride began, she lifted her phone, filming the darkness and sudden flashes. The car moved slowly through tight corridors while animatronics lunged from the walls. Midway through the ride, the car stalled briefly near a section designed to look like a flooded electrical room. Yellow and black hazard stripes were painted along the wall, and fake sparks flashed overhead. Lin leaned sideways for a better angle. The lighting was low, and she mistook an electrified effect panel for part of the set. A high-voltage spark effect unit was built into the wall as part of the set, normally protected by a clear plastic barrier, and a small warning label indicating not to touch the electrified prop. Surveillance footage later showed Lin extending her arm outside the car, reaching past the clear safety barrier to steady herself against the electrified wall while continuing to record. Her fingers made contact with the electrified effect rod. Witnesses in the car felt a sudden jolt as Lynn's body stiffened. Her phone dropped into her lap as her arm locked in place against the wall. The electrical current traveled through her hand, across her chest, and into a grounded metal handrail beside the seat, completing the circuit through her body. Sparks were visible for a brief moment, captured on a camera mounted near the ceiling. The ride continued moving for several seconds before stopping automatically due to a power fault. Lynn collapsed forward in her seat, unresponsive. Her friends screamed and tried to shake her, but she did not move. Smoke lingered in the tunnel, and emergency lights switched on as operators initiated an evacuation. Staff reached the car within 3 minutes and found Lynn unresponsive, with no breathing or pulse. Paramedics arrived about 7 minutes later, attempted CPR and defibrillation, and pronounced her dead at the scene. The post-mortem ruled electrocution as the cause, noting electrical burns on her hand and cardiac arrest caused by current passing through her body. Investigators confirmed she had reached past a safety barrier and made direct contact with an intentionally electrified effect prop inside the tunnel. The ride closed that day for inspection and safety review, and her phone was returned, its final video cutting to black. It was January 14, 2014. An aquatic adventure park buzzed with typical summer energy under the blazing Australian sun. Families and teenagers scattered across the sprawling water complex. Liam Broussard, a lanky 16-year-old from Brisbane, stood in line for the park's signature near-vertical water slide. Among his group of school friends, Liam had earned a reputation as someone who never backed down from a challenge. That afternoon, he'd spent nearly 3 hours at the park's food court, systematically working through a self-imposed eating challenge: 2 large meat pies, a family-sized order of chips, 3 energy drinks, and a chocolate milkshake. Friends later admitted they'd egged him on. By around 2 p.m., Liam was visibly uncomfortable, sweating despite the air conditioning, and complaining of stomach cramps. Water slides create significant but brief physiological stress on riders. The near-vertical enclosed tube generates short-duration forces typically estimated between 1.5 and 2.5 Gs, compressing internal organs and increasing abdominal pressure. Park safety signage warned riders against using the slides while feeling unwell or nauseous, including after heavy eating, guidance that Liam and his friends chose to ignore. The slide's design, a completely enclosed tube with no emergency exits, meant riders were committed to the full approximately 10 to 12-second descent once they entered. Lifeguards stationed at the top were trained to identify potentially ill riders, but peak afternoon crowds reduced the depth of individual screening. At approximately 2:45 p.m., despite feeling nauseous and dizzy, Liam refused his friend's suggestions to skip the ride. The lifeguard at the top noticed Liam's pale complexion and asked if he felt okay, but Liam insisted he was fine, which satisfied the park's basic verbal clearance requirement. His friends gathered at the splash pool below, ready to watch his triumphant emergence. When the lifeguard gave the all-clear signal, Liam positioned himself at the trapdoor entrance. The trapdoor released, sending Liam plummeting into the enclosed tube. Within the first few seconds, the combined acceleration and body position triggered violent gastric reflux. He vomited forcefully, the confined space and his supine orientation making it impossible to turn his head or clear the material away from his airway. The mixture of partially digested food and liquid entered his mouth and upper airway as he continued descending. Aspiration occurred as he involuntarily inhaled, rapidly obstructing airflow. Oxygen deprivation followed quickly, and he likely lost consciousness several seconds before exiting the slide, with the remaining portion of the descent occurring while he was unresponsive. When Liam's body emerged into the splash pool, his friends immediately knew something was catastrophically wrong. Instead of the usual splash and movement, his entry was uncontrolled and face down. Lifeguards pulled his unconscious form from the water, immediately beginning CPR and airway management while calling emergency services. Paramedics arrived within about 8 minutes, but Liam never regained consciousness. He was pronounced dead at hospital. Following prolonged resuscitation attempts, the autopsy determined the primary cause of death was asphyxiation due to aspiration of gastric contents, with secondary drowning listed as a complicating factor. His death prompted policy revisions emphasizing stricter enforcement of post-meal waiting guidelines and expanded lifeguard authority to deny rides based on visible distress rather than universal medical screening. His friends later said that they struggled with guilt over encouraging the eating binge that contributed to their classmate's death. It was July 24, 1982. A sweltering summer day at Action Park in Vernon, New Jersey turned deadly for 15-year-old George Lopez. The teenager had come to the infamous amusement park with friends, looking forward to cooling off and enjoying the various water attractions. Instead, he would become the first victim of what employees would later grimly nickname the Grave Pool. Action Park's notoriously dangerous wave pool. Action Park had opened just 4 years earlier in 1978 and had quickly gained a reputation for its extreme attractions and lax safety standards. The park was the brainchild of Eugene Mulvihill, a businessman who believed in giving thrill seekers freedom, often at the expense of basic safety precautions. Among the park's many attractions was the tidal wave pool, a 100-foot wide by 250-foot long pool that could hold up to 1,000 people at a time. Unlike typical wave pools, Action Park's version was particularly dangerous. The pool reached a depth of 8 feet and generated waves up to 3 feet high using powerful air-pressurized pumps. These weren't gentle, rolling swells, but powerful, chaotic surges that could easily overwhelm even strong swimmers. Adding to the danger, the pool's bottom was painted blue, making it difficult for lifeguards to spot swimmers in distress. That Saturday afternoon, the wave pool was operating at near capacity. Hundreds of visitors packed the water, creating a chaotic scene that made it nearly impossible for lifeguards to monitor everyone effectively. Despite the park's claim of having up to 12 lifeguards on duty, former employees would later reveal that many were undertrained and overwhelmed, sometimes performing as many as 30 rescues per day. As the powerful waves began churning the water, George found himself in the deeper section of the pool. Whether he ventured there intentionally or was pushed by the crowd remains unclear. What is known is that at some point George began to struggle. In the crowded, churning water, his distress went unnoticed by both lifeguards and fellow swimmers. By the time anyone realized George was missing, it was too late. Lifeguards eventually spotted him submerged in the deep end and pulled him from the water. Frantic attempts at resuscitation began immediately. But despite these efforts, George Lopez was pronounced dead at the scene from drowning. The tragedy sent shockwaves through the local community. George was described by friends and family as a kind, energetic teenager with his whole life ahead of him. His parents were devastated, struggling to understand how their son could have drowned in a supervised attraction. In the aftermath of George's death, Action Park made minimal changes to the wave pool's operation. The park added more lifeguards and implemented some additional safety measures, but the fundamental dangers remained. Remarkably, the wave pool continued to operate, and the park faced no significant legal consequences. What made George Lopez's death even more tragic was that it wasn't enough to prompt meaningful change. Despite this clear warning sign, Action Park's wave pool would claim 2 more lives in the years that followed. In August 1984, 20-year-old Donald DePass drowned in the same pool, and in 1987, 18-year-old Gregory Grandchamps became the 3rd victim. Action Park's response to these incidents followed a disturbing pattern. The park would implement minor changes, enough to satisfy basic requirements, but never addressed the fundamental design flaws that made the wave pool inherently dangerous. The park's owner had created his own insurance company to underwrite the park's liability, effectively insulating himself from the financial consequences of accidents and deaths. George Lopez's death in 1982 marked the beginning of Action Park's darkest chapter. Over its 18 years of operation, at least 6 people would die at the park, earning it nicknames like Class Action Park and Traction Park among locals who were all too familiar with its dangers. Today, George Lopez is remembered as the first victim of a park that prioritized extreme thrills over basic safety. His death at just 15 years old serves as a sobering reminder of the consequences when amusement parks operate without proper oversight. A young life needlessly lost to negligence and the pursuit of profit. It was August 3rd, 2015, at a large water park outside Orlando, Florida. Afternoon temperatures hovered near 95 degrees as peak summer crowds filled the park's attractions. Towering above the surrounding pool stood Tsunami Tower, a newly opened body slide complex featuring multiple high-speed drop slides designed to simulate near-vertical descent. The structure rose roughly 85 feet above ground level and had been operating for just under 4 months. 16-year-old Lily Anderson arrived at the park with friends to celebrate her birthday. A competitive swimmer since childhood, Lily was confident in the water and accustomed to intense physical conditions. She met the posted height requirement for all attractions and had ridden similar slides before. The group had entered the park early, but by mid-afternoon, ride queues had lengthened and operations were running at maximum capacity. After nearly an hour in line, Lily reached the upper platform of one of Tsunami Tower's capsule-style body slides. The ride used a transparent standing capsule with a trapdoor floor designed to drop riders into a steep enclosed chute below. Riders were instructed to cross their arms over their chest, stand upright, and remain still until the floor released. The slide relied on a combination of gravity and water flow to control descent speed, with sensors designed to confirm proper rider position before activation. During Lily's loading cycle, the capsule's internal position sensor confirmed her stance as compliant, allowing the release cycle to proceed under normal operating parameters. The system did not flag an error, and the trapdoor released normally. Lily entered the slide feet first, accelerating rapidly through the initial vertical section. As she transitioned into the lower curve of the enclosed chute, the combination of high water volume and the slide's geometry caused her to carry more speed than the run-out section was designed to manage. Near the slide's run-out section, Lily exited the chute with greater momentum than the shallow splashdown zone was designed to absorb. Instead of decelerating smoothly into the pool, her body struck the far edge of the run-out channel head first. Lifeguards stationed at the landing zone witnessed the impact and entered the water immediately. Lily was pulled from the pool unresponsive, with visible head trauma. CPR and oxygen support were initiated while emergency services were contacted. Park staff cleared the area and shut down the entire slide complex within minutes. Lily was transported to a nearby trauma center, where imaging revealed severe swelling and hemorrhaging in the brain, consistent with high-velocity blunt force impact. Despite emergency surgical intervention, she never regained consciousness. She was pronounced dead later that evening due to catastrophic traumatic brain injury. The subsequent investigation determined that the accident resulted from a combination of excessive water flow, insufficient deceleration space in the slide's run-out design, and operating tolerances that, under certain conditions, allowed riders to exit the chute at unsafe speed. Inspectors concluded the death was preventable. Tsunami Tower was closed pending redesign of the slide's exit geometry, regulatory review, and updated operational limits. It was October 12, 2013. One of Tokyo City's amusement park hummed with its usual Saturday afternoon energy, roller coasters cycling through their loops while families moved between attractions. In a restricted maintenance corridor behind a roller coaster, 25-year-old Kaito Nakamura was about to make the last questionable decision of his life. Kaito was a third-year business student at a private university in Shibuya, known among classmates for increasingly reckless stunts. They accompanied him trespassing in construction sites, climbing transmission towers, and sneaking into off-limits areas. Friends described him as desperate for attention, someone who constantly needed to one-up his previous stunts. He had received multiple warnings from university administrators about his activities. That specific roller coaster in Tokyo had a maintenance zone that housed heavy cart transport systems that moved along floor-mounted rails, shuttling ride vehicles between the main track and service bays. The service carts weighed approximately 800 pounds empty and carried 600-pound ride vehicles, totaling roughly 1,400 pounds when loaded. Floors were normally clean and dry, but a recent maintenance task left a slick patch of hydraulic fluid near the rails. Multiple signs in Japanese warned unauthorized personnel about crush hazards and moving equipment, with access restricted by locked gates, keypad-controlled doors, and motion sensors. That afternoon, Kaito arrived at the park with 3 friends who knew about his plan to infiltrate the maintenance area. His friends said that he planned to climb the service fence, photograph himself beside the actual ride mechanisms, and escape. His friends protested weakly, pointing out the danger signs, but Kaito dismissed their concerns as cowardice. He had successfully trespassed in dozens of locations without incident, likely building a false confidence. At 2:47 in the afternoon, an exterior security camera captured Kaito scaling the chain-link barrier, while his friends watched nervously from outside. Internal cameras in the corridor recorded him as he landed. Although cameras covered the corridor, the live operator was focused on passenger loading and ride dispatch monitors rather than the maintenance transport feed. Carts moved every 4 minutes along the rails. Warning lights flashed amber throughout the corridor, indicating the system was operational. The automated cart system was live because a maintenance crew was working on a different section of the track, requiring transport carts to remain active to shuttle vehicles between service bays. Full lockout-tagout procedures had not been applied to the transport corridor. Kaito seemed to have ignored everything, likely focusing on getting the perfect shot. Moving deeper into the restricted space, Kaito positioned himself near the rail system for a photograph. The concrete floor was coated with a thin layer of hydraulic oil left from a recent repair. As he turned to signal his friends, his feet slid out from under him. He fell directly into the path of an incoming transport cart carrying a fully loaded 1,400-pound coaster vehicle, moving at approximately 8 miles per hour. Emergency brakes engaged immediately but could not stop the cart in time. The crushing impact was instantaneous. Kaito's body was compressed between the cart and a concrete support pillar, causing catastrophic blunt force trauma to his chest and abdomen. The impact left extensive blood evidence across the cart and surrounding structure. His friends screamed, and one immediately called emergency services. Park medics reached the corridor within 4 minutes but could not provide life-saving intervention. First responders arrived within 7 minutes. The coroner determined death occurred within seconds from catastrophic blunt force trauma to the thorax, resulting in multiple rib fractures, collapsed lungs, and severe heart damage. Toxicology tests were negative. Surveillance footage from the exterior and corridor cameras confirmed the entire sequence from illegal entry to fatal impact. Park management handed all footage to authorities. They interviewed his 3 friends regarding the incident and noted their delayed call to security. The friends required psychological counseling for months, haunted by watching their peer die for their validation in a completely preventable tragedy. It was August 3, 2016, at a water park in Phoenix, Arizona. By late morning, heat sat heavy over packed walkways. Temperatures passed 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Whistles sounded, pumps roared, and safety rules looped, blending into the background as families queued, restless, slick with sunscreen, waiting for slides to clear. Daniel Kress was 38 and worked as a shift supervisor at a warehouse in Glendale. He ran crews, filled in when people called out, and liked being known as dependable. After a doctor warned him about high blood pressure, he lost nearly 40 pounds. The physical change led him to take more physical risks without medical clearance. At home, Daniel was a hands-on dad to 2 young kids and had been married since his early 20s. He liked recording small moments on his phone. Nothing public, just clips sent to family chats. In the months before the incident, coworkers noticed he increasingly joked about still having it and proving he wasn't fragile. It was his day off. By noon, the heat was brutal and the park was packed, with lines spilling across hot concrete and lifeguards shouting to be heard. Daniel pointed to the tallest speed slide, a near-vertical body slide built for maximum drop and acceleration. Signs and staff repeatedly warned riders to go feet first. Daniel laughed it off, strapped his phone into a waterproof chest pouch, and ignored another warning about head-first entries increasing speed and risk at the shallow runout. When it was his turn, Daniel didn't sit the way he was told. He leaned forward, tucked his arms in tight, and pushed off head first. A fixed overhead safety camera later confirmed his launch angle, and body position differed from the required posture. The slide's angle forced him to pick up speed almost immediately. Water slammed against his shoulders as the tube narrowed. When he burst out of the exit, his head was the first point of contact. His forehead struck the concrete lip at the end of the slide. His neck violently folded under the force, while the rest of his body continued forward due to momentum. His torso folded, then struck the water's surface flat. People nearby saw his body slide several feet and roll face down. He did not attempt to lift his head or arms. Riders exiting behind him collided with his lower body, rolling him face down in the shallow runout. Screaming started immediately. Lifeguards activated emergency protocols and entered the pool. Daniel was pulled onto the deck within seconds. His body was unresponsive, with no purposeful movement, and his eyes remained open but unfocused. His phone case was cracked across his chest. Lifeguards initiated emergency care while another staff member called 911. Security footage later documented the precise impact point at the slide exit. Paramedics arrived approximately 7 minutes after the call. They immobilized his neck, assessed breathing and pulse, and transferred him onto a stretcher as guests were cleared from the area. No spontaneous breathing or response was observed. He was pronounced dead shortly after arrival at the emergency department, per hospital protocol. The medical examiner determined that Daniel died from a high cervical spine fracture. The impact fractured vertebrae at the base of the skull, disrupting the spinal cord and brainstem, which immediately stopped breathing and heart regulation. The report stated survival was not possible given the injury severity. The death was ruled an accident caused by unsafe riding behavior. Toxicology tests showed no alcohol or drugs. Investigators noted that warning signs were visible and that staff issued verbal instructions multiple times. Afterward, the park installed a physical entry barrier preventing headfirst launches. Daniel's phone was returned to his wife. The final video file ended abruptly just before the exit, cutting off mid-motion. It was June 3rd, 2017. The afternoon sun beat down on the outdoor karting facility in Leipzig, casting long shadows across the asphalt track. Thomas Richter, a 41-year-old warehouse supervisor, adjusted his helmet one final time before climbing into cart number 14. Thomas wasn't a racer. He worked the night shift at a logistics company outside Leipzig, managing inventory and supervising a small crew. Co-workers described him as competent but volatile, prone to explosive outbursts when things didn't go his way. He'd been written up twice in the past year for confronting employees who made mistakes, and his supervisor had placed him on formal probation just 3 weeks earlier. Go-karting involves piloting small, low-powered vehicles around tight circuits at speeds up to approximately 35 to 40 miles per hour, where drivers sit inches from the ground in minimal safety equipment, relying primarily on full-face helmets and rigid seat positioning in a sport where light contact between carts is common and expected. The low-slung rental cart lacked a roll bar or seat belt, relying entirely on the driver remaining seated for stability. Tomas hadn't been on a kart track in over a decade, but his brother had organized the outing for his birthday. The facility required all drivers to attend a brief safety orientation, covering basic rules: keep both hands on the wheel, remain seated at all times, and never attempt to turn around or remove hands from the steering wheel during a session. Others noted that Tomas seemed distracted during the briefing, checking his phone. The recreational race began normally with 12 drivers navigating the roughly quarter-mile circuit. Tomas started in 8th position, immediately showing his inexperience by taking corners too aggressively and falling behind slower, more cautious drivers. His frustration was visible even through his helmet, as recreational drivers passed him on the inside lines. Track cameras captured him gesturing angrily at other drivers and shouting inside his helmet. On lap 7, another driver made light contact with Thomas's rear bumper while attempting to pass on the inside of turn 3. The bump was minor, but Thomas reacted explosively. Security footage shows him immediately turning around in his seat to shout at the driver behind him. In his rage, he lifted himself out of the seat, ignoring the track rule. While Thomas was turned backward in his seat, screaming and gesturing, his unmanned cart drifted toward the outside of turn 4 at approximately 20 to 25 miles per hour. Without his weight properly centered in the seat, lateral cornering forces caused his upper body to tip over the side of the cart, and he was ejected headfirst onto the asphalt track. His helmet struck the pavement with devastating force. His driverless cart immediately struck his prone body, followed seconds later by another cart whose driver couldn't avoid the sudden obstruction. Track marshals stopped the race instantly and called emergency services. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes. He was transported by advanced life support ambulance to the hospital, where he died 4 hours later from massive brain injuries. The medical examiner determined death resulted from severe skull fractures and traumatic brain injury consistent with high-energy impact, with the track surface followed by secondary cart contact. The facility immediately implemented stricter martial authority to black flag aggressive behavior and enhanced pre-race briefings, emphasizing zero tolerance for confrontational conduct. Thomas's employer later revealed he'd been on probation for workplace anger incidents, raising questions about how unmanaged behavioral issues can translate into risk during high-adrenaline recreational activities. It was July 8, 1980. A bright summer day at Action Park in Vernon, New Jersey, turned tragic when 19-year-old George Larson Jr. embarked on what would be his final ride. The Alpine Slide, one of the park's most popular attractions, was about to claim its first victim, forever changing the legacy of a place that would later become known as Class Action Park for its numerous accidents and lawsuits. George was a typical teenager enjoying a day at the notorious amusement park nestled in the mountains of northern New Jersey. Action Park had opened just 2 years earlier in 1978, quickly gaining popularity for its extreme attractions that pushed the boundaries of safety. The Alpine Slide was one of the park's signature rides, a 2,700-foot-long concrete and fiberglass track that snaked down the mountain, where riders would descend on small plastic sleds equipped with a simple handbrake. Unlike modern water slides with their carefully engineered safety features, the Alpine Slide was primitive by comparison. The track was made of concrete, fiberglass, and asbestos, materials that would cause severe abrasions if a rider fell off their sled. The only protection riders had was a small handbrake that often malfunctioned, leaving them with a terrifying choice: risk going too fast and flying off the track, or brake too hard and get rammed from behind by another rider. On that fateful day, George mounted his sled at the top of the mountain, likely feeling the same mix of excitement and trepidation that most riders experienced. The Alpine Slide offered a thrilling descent with sharp turns and steep drops. As he pushed off and began his journey down the mountain, everything seemed normal at first. Other park-goers were enjoying their day, unaware that they were about to witness a horrific accident. As George navigated a particularly tricky section of the track, something went terribly wrong. According to witnesses, his sled suddenly jumped the track on a curve. The momentum carried him off the concrete chute and sent him flying through the air. In a split second, George's head violently struck a large rock adjacent to the track. The impact was catastrophic. Park employees rushed to the scene, finding George unconscious and severely injured. Emergency services were called, and he was quickly transported to a nearby hospital. For 8 days, George fought for his life in the hospital, but the injuries to his head were too severe. On July 16, 1980, George Larson Jr. succumbed to his injuries, becoming Action Park's first recorded fatality. The investigation that followed revealed troubling details about the Alpine Slide's safety record. Former employees later admitted that accidents on the slide were so common that the park had purchased an additional ambulance specifically to transport injured riders to the hospital. On busy days, it wasn't unusual for the slide to cause dozens of injuries, ranging from scrapes and bruises to broken bones and concussions. What made George's death even more tragic was how preventable it was. The Alpine Slide had been plagued with design flaws from the beginning. The track deteriorated quickly under heavy use, developing cracks and gaps that could catch the small sleds and send riders flying. The handbrakes were notoriously unreliable, often failing completely and leaving riders with no way to control their speed. Despite these known issues, the park continued to operate the attraction with minimal modifications. George's family was devastated by his death. His parents had to cope not only with the loss of their son, but also with the knowledge that his death resulted from negligence and corner cutting. The park's owner, Gene Mulvihill, was known for his cavalier attitude toward safety regulations, often circumventing them entirely by creating his own insurance company to underwrite the park's liability. In the aftermath of George's death, Action Park made only minor adjustments to the Alpine slide. The ride continued to operate for years afterward, causing countless more injuries before finally being shut down in the late 1990s. Remarkably, no criminal charges were ever filed against the park's management, despite the clear safety violations that led to George's death. George Larson Jr.'s tragic accident marked the beginning of Action Park's dark legacy. Over the years, 5 more people would die at the park, earning it nicknames like Traction Park and Accident Park among locals. The Alpine slide alone would be responsible for thousands of injuries during its operation. Today, George's story serves as a sobering reminder of the consequences when amusement parks prioritize thrills over safety. His death, at just 19 years old, cut short a life full of promise and potential. While Action Park has since closed and reopened under new management with modern safety standards, the memory of George Larson Jr. and his tragic final ride on the Alpine slide remains a haunting chapter in the park's infamous history. A young life needlessly lost to negligence and the pursuit of extreme entertainment. It was July 2nd, 2017, when 34-year-old Ethan Ward arrived at a local amusement park in Allentown, Pennsylvania, with 2 colleagues for what was supposed to be a refreshing break from the sweltering summer heat. Ethan worked in an office environment and was known for his methodical approach to everything. His colleagues had convinced him to join them for a midday outing to beat the oppressive temperatures. Accompanying Ethan were Priya, a 29-year-old administrative worker whose attention to detail made her invaluable at work, and Luis, a 36-year-old delivery driver whose upbeat personality could lift anyone's spirits. The trio decided that the park's classic log flume would be perfect to cool off while enjoying some mild thrills. As they approached the attraction, they noticed a sign indicating reduced capacity due to maintenance on one water pump. The water level appeared marginally lower than usual, but operations continued. A boat ahead had briefly stalled before the conveyor lift, then resumed after a few moments. This log flume operated without lap bars, following traditional design where riders sat in line with feet in a front footwell separated by a central divider. Ethan took the front position, with Priya behind him and Luis in the rear. The operator reminded them to keep arms inside and maintain proper seating position. As their log engaged the conveyor lift, they heard a slight shudder during the first small drop. An audible scraping sound began from the right side, and the hull rode higher against the right channel fender than normal. Overhead speakers crackled intermittently, though a maintenance technician had given an all-clear gesture. At the second drop entry, the boat's trajectory became problematic. The bow climbed onto the side panel and caught on a protruding bolt head. The log yawed and became wedged diagonally across the waterway. Oncoming water pushed the bow downward while the stern remained elevated. Ethan's shins slid under the central divider, and his feet became trapped in the front footwell's geometry. The jam angle and water pressure made withdrawal impossible. Priya tried pulling him backward, while Luis helped from behind, but without proper leverage, their efforts proved futile. The boat remained locked diagonally across the channel. The pump system continued operating, forcing water into a confined pocket around the bow. Within minutes, the front compartment filled rapidly, and water rose toward Ethan's chin as he remained trapped forward. Attendants quickly signaled to shut down pumps, but mechanical access to free the jammed hull took precious time. Water flow couldn't be stopped immediately because the pump isolation valves were located in a locked service alcove. The hand attempt to lift the boat failed due to torque from the wedged position and accumulated water weight. As the surging water continued overtopping the bow section, Ethan's airway became repeatedly submerged. Despite frantic efforts from companions and the arriving maintenance crew, extraction remained blocked until they brought mechanical prying tools. By the time maintenance used a pry bar to free the boat's bow from the protruding bolt, Ethan had sustained fatal injuries from prolonged submersion and entrapment. Emergency medical services performed CPR and advanced airway management, but were unable to restore a sustainable pulse. The investigation revealed that the protruding bolt and excessive guide wheel wear had created conditions for the hull to jam. Reduced water flow from the offline pump also contributed to the boat's abnormal positioning. Priya's detailed account of the scraping sounds provided crucial information for investigators, while Luis confirmed the jam sequence. The affected channel section was immediately drained and closed, pending a complete safety review of all hardware and water flow systems. It was June 22nd, 2013, on a historic amusement pier along the Atlantic City coastline. The overcast afternoon followed heavy morning thunderstorms that had soaked the wooden decking and left standing water throughout covered areas of the park. By early afternoon, operators reopened most attractions as weather conditions improved, and families began returning to the pier to enjoy the weekend. 42-year-old David Park arrived with his 15-year-old son, Kevin, hoping to spend uninterrupted time together after several difficult months following his divorce. David worked as a licensed electrician and was accustomed to noticing hazards most people overlooked. As they walked the pier, he observed water pooled near extension cords, older electrical cabinets, and arcade machines housed in structures that offered little protection from wind-driven rain. He chose not to comment, wanting the day to feel normal for Kevin. The two drifted toward the pier's enclosed arcade, one of the few attractions still busy while outdoor rides dried out. Rows of vintage machines lined the narrow interior, their power supplied through floor-level junction boxes installed decades earlier. The wooden floor remained damp from water tracked in by visitors escaping the rain. David and Kevin paused near a row of classic racing cabinets. Kevin began playing while David stood nearby, leaning against a support beam and watching. As David shifted his footing, his shoe slid slightly on the wet surface. He instinctively reached out and grabbed the metal side panel of an arcade cabinet to steady himself. The cabinet's internal wiring had been compromised earlier that morning when rainwater seeped into its electrical housing. The fault allowed current to energize the cabinet's metal casing. When David made contact, he received a sudden electrical shock that caused his muscles to contract involuntarily. He lost balance and fell backward, striking the back of his head against the hardwood floor. Nearby patrons heard the impact and called for help as Kevin rushed to his father's side. Arcade staff immediately cut power to the affected row of machines and contacted emergency services. David was unconscious and breathing irregularly when first responders arrived minutes later. Paramedics stabilized him and transported him to a nearby medical center. Imaging revealed a severe traumatic brain injury caused by blunt force impact during the fall. Despite intensive care efforts, including measures to control swelling and intracranial pressure, David never regained consciousness. He was pronounced dead later that evening due to complications from head trauma. The investigation determined that the electrical shock was non-lethal, but directly contributed to the fall that caused the fatal injury. Inspectors found that multiple arcade machines were inadequately sealed against moisture, and that floor-level electrical connections were not properly protected for wet conditions common on the pier. The affected arcade was shut down temporarily while damaged equipment and wiring were replaced. Pier management implemented updated procedures requiring immediate closure of indoor attractions following heavy rain until electrical systems could be inspected and dry conditions confirmed. No criminal charges were filed, and the incident was ruled an accidental death resulting from environmental conditions and aging infrastructure. It was July 18, 2016. The afternoon sun beat down on a major water park outside Toronto, Ontario. Thomas Reynolds, a 32-year-old construction manager, sat in a 6-person raft approaching the ride's most turbulent section. Thomas had spent 8 years managing residential construction projects across the Greater Toronto Area. Colleagues described him as hands-on and practical, the type who'd climb scaffolding himself rather than wait for workers. He was a strong swimmer who'd grown up on Lake Ontario, comfortable in water most people would avoid. Thomas had developed an unusual hobby over the past year, scavenging debris from rivers and waterways. His garage contained fishing lures, sunglasses, even a GoPro camera he'd retrieved from various bodies of water. He'd mentioned to friends about wanting to check what accumulated in water park ride systems. Convinced valuable items ended up trapped in intake grates and flow diverters. Rapids rides operate by channeling thousands of gallons through concrete troughs fitted with jets and obstacles, creating turbulent currents that move circular rafts through the course at speeds reaching 15 miles per hour. That afternoon, witnesses said that Thomas had ridden the rapids 3 times already with his girlfriend, studying the water flow and debris accumulation points. On his 4th ride, he told her that he spotted something floating near one of the steel support brackets where the protective padding had deteriorated over time, leaving a hard steel flange intermittently exposed during high water flow, what appeared to be a waterproof phone case bobbing in the current. Despite his girlfriend's protests, Thomas leaned over the raft's edge as they approached the rapids section, reaching toward the debris. Park staff operating the ride exit noticed immediately, activating their radio to alert control operators. The radio call was garbled by the ride's pump alarms. Other riders in his raft attempted to warn him, but Thomas stretched further, his torso now completely over the side. The raft hit the first rapid at full speed, tilting sharply right. Thomas lost his grip, pitching headfirst into the churning water. The current was far more powerful than he anticipated, instantly sweeping him toward the concrete channel wall. Before he could orient himself, the water drove him directly into the exposed steel flange, striking him with catastrophic force. Thomas's head struck the beam, and his body went limp as the current carried him approximately 30 feet downstream. The water around him darkened as he drifted downstream. Riders downstream screamed as Thomas's unconscious body floated past their rafts. Park staff hit the emergency shutdown within 20 seconds, but the water volume kept the current moving, so full stoppage took nearly 90 seconds. 2 lifeguards immediately initiated emergency procedures, throwing rescue ropes, and when it became clear the raft could not be retrieved in time, both entered the water to pull Thomas from the ride's exit pool. He had sustained a severe head injury. The first lifeguard began CPR while the second called emergency services. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes, finding Thomas unresponsive with no pulse. Despite advanced life support, he was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner's report identified fatal head injuries caused by blunt force trauma. Drowning was ruled out as the primary cause. Thomas had died from the impact itself. The waterproof case Thomas had reached for was recovered from near the intake grate, containing a broken smartphone. A subsequent investigation determined the ride had been operating as designed, and that the fatal injuries resulted from rider misconduct. No mechanical failures were identified, and the case was closed following inspection. It was October 6, 2016, at a regional fairground, where crowds moved beneath glowing midway lights as a Ferris wheel turned steadily above damp pavement on an overcast evening. Evan Brooks was 27 and had recently begun trying to build a small online following through short vlogs and stunt clips. He worked full-time as a delivery driver out of Tacoma, spending long days on the road and filming whenever he had time off. His videos were simple: rides, heights, risky angles meant to look fearless. Friends said he liked showing he was calm in situations that made others nervous, especially when there was a camera involved. That evening, Evan arrived alone after finishing his route early. Weather reports earlier in the day had mentioned scattered thunderstorms moving toward Pierce County, but the fair remained open. The air was warm and heavy, clouds gathering low over the grounds. Evan bought multiple tickets for the Ferris wheel, telling friends later online that he wanted storm footage from above the fair. Warning lights near the ride signaled that weather could cause delays, and recorded announcements repeated that the wheel might stop without notice. Evan boarded anyway, phone already recording. The gondola rose slowly as wind pushed lightly against the cabin. Below him, the midway lights blurred into long streaks across the wet pavement. As the wheel climbed higher, thunder rolled somewhere beyond the fairgrounds. Evan continued filming, leaning toward the open side window to keep the clouds in frame. Other riders later said he appeared focused on his phone, adjusting angles instead of watching the ride. Near the top of the rotation, the wheel slowed as operators prepared for a possible shutdown. Wind gusts rocked the gondola gently. The metal frame creaked overhead. Evan shifted forward again, stretching his arm out to capture the darkening sky. A sudden flash lit the clouds nearby. The thunder followed almost immediately. Witnesses said Evan flinched at the sound. In the same moment, The gondola swayed sharply in the wind. Still leaning forward with one hand braced against the window frame, Evan lost his balance. His upper body tipped past the open side. Security footage later showed him trying to pull back, his phone slipping from his hand as his weight shifted outward. With only a low metal lap bar across the opening, his torso slid over it and through the gap. In less than a second, his hips cleared the seat edge, and he fell from the gondola. Operators stopped the wheel immediately and called emergency services at 8:17 p.m. Fare staff cleared the area as responders arrived within minutes. Evan was found on the ground beneath the Ferris wheel, unresponsive and bleeding heavily from head and chest injuries. Paramedics attempted resuscitation, but no pulse or breathing was detected. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner later ruled the cause of death multiple blunt force injuries from a fall from height. Fractures to the skull, spine, and internal organs indicated death occurred instantly on impact. Investigators found no mechanical failure with the gondola, and confirmed weather conditions had not yet reached shutdown thresholds when Evan boarded. Witness statements and video showed he had been leaning out of the open side while filming when he lost his balance. The Ferris wheel closed for the night as storms moved in. Evan's phone was recovered near the base of the ride, its final recording ending in blurred lights and wind noise just before the fall. It was October 31st, 2018. The narrow cobblestone streets of Krakow's Old Town buzzed with Halloween festivities as temporary haunted attractions sprouted in converted warehouses throughout the historic district. Marek Zielinski, a 29-year-old personal trainer from a local fitness chain, stood outside a temporary haunted attraction with his date, Anna, dismissing the screams echoing from within as theatrical nonsense designed to fool tourists and children. Marek had built his reputation on physical toughness and mental resilience. Working at a popular gym franchise, he specialized in high-intensity training and martial arts conditioning, often incorporating kickboxing techniques into client workouts. His social media featured videos of him breaking boards and performing advanced kicks. That evening, he'd spent 20 minutes outside the attraction loudly explaining to his date how haunted houses use cheap psychology and fake scares. Haunted attractions rely on controlled environments where actors and animatronics create startling effects through timing, lighting, and sound. Most temporary installations use lightweight construction materials like plywood partitions and fabric walls to create maze-like corridors quickly and cheaply. Behind these thin barriers, mechanical systems operate pulleys, pneumatic devices, and moving figures designed to surprise visitors at predetermined moments. Safety protocols typically require reinforced barriers between public areas and mechanical spaces, but temporary attractions operating under short-term permits often rely on minimal separation to save time and cost. According to Anna, Marek had convinced her to visit the temporary haunted attraction. The attraction featured a series of narrow corridors lined with jump scares, including motion-activated animatronics designed to lunge at visitors. Marek entered the maze likely determined to prove his point, challenging the actors to try scaring him. When other visitors screamed at planned scares, he laughed dismissively. His aggressive behavior was drawing complaints from other customers trying to enjoy the experience, though no staff intervened before the incident. The incident occurred in the attraction's third corridor, where a mechanical zombie was programmed to burst through a false wall when motion sensors detected approaching visitors. As the animatronic activated, Marek decided to demonstrate his martial arts skills by attempting a high roundhouse kick aimed at the figure's head. The kick connected of the animatronic, but his follow-through carried his leg beyond the target. His right foot punched through the thin plywood barrier, separating the public corridor from the mechanical service area behind the walls. The partition, constructed from approximately half-inch plywood intended only as a visual divider, offered no resistance to his frame moving at full force. As his leg broke through, a continuously cycling steel cable loop driven by a small industrial motor with no load-sensing cutoff caught his ankle, snagging and tightening. The motor continued running, as programmed to complete its movement cycle unless manually shut down. Marek's body was pulled violently against the jagged opening he'd created. His upper spine struck the sharp plywood edge with devastating force as the cable system dragged him partially into the cramped mechanical space. The impact fractured his cervical spine, causing immediate paralysis, and loss of voluntary breathing, while his lower back was crushed against the metal framework supporting the animatronic systems. His scream cut off abruptly as spinal shock and respiratory failure set in, and witnesses heard the mechanical grinding continue for several seconds before staff realized something had gone wrong. Anna immediately called emergency services while attraction employees shut down power to the mechanical systems. Paramedics arrived fast, but required additional time to carefully extract Marek's body from the tangled machinery. He was pronounced dead at the scene after sustained respiratory arrest and catastrophic spinal trauma. The medical examiner determined that high cervical spinal cord injury leading to respiratory failure was the primary cause of death, with severe blunt force injuries to the torso contributing. The temporary haunted attraction was permanently closed and dismantled within 48 hours. City officials launched investigations into temporary attraction safety standards, leading to stricter construction requirements for seasonal entertainment venues. It was June 27, 1999. It was a warm summer day at Paramount's Great America theme park in Santa Clara, California. 7-year-old Danielle Gentile was enjoying a day of fun with her family, excited to experience the thrilling water attractions that the park had to offer. Little did anyone know that this ordinary family outing would end in an unimaginable tragedy that would forever change pool safety regulations across America. Danielle, a vibrant and energetic second grader from Millbrae, California, had been looking forward to this trip for weeks. With her bright smile and playful spirit, she eagerly made her way through the park with her parents and siblings, eventually arriving at the Whirlwind Rapids water attraction in the park's splash zone area. The Whirlwind Rapids was a circular water ride where guests would sit in inner tubes and spin around a large pool before being funneled into a catch pool at the bottom. It was a popular attraction, especially on hot summer days, and the line was filled with excited children and their families. When it was finally Danielle's turn, she climbed into her inner tube and began the thrilling descent. She laughed as she spun through the rapids, the cool water providing relief from the summer heat. But as she reached the catch pool at the bottom of the ride, something went terribly wrong. Witnesses reported seeing Danielle's inner tube flip over as she entered the catch pool. In an instant, the young girl was submerged underwater. What happened next would haunt her family and other park goers for years to come. Beneath the surface of the catch pool was a powerful suction drain with a missing safety cover. As Danielle struggled underwater, her arm was suddenly caught in this uncovered drain. The suction force, estimated at hundreds of pounds of pressure, made it impossible for the 50-pound child to free herself. Parkgoers quickly noticed the overturned inner tube and alerted nearby lifeguards. A frantic rescue attempt began as staff and bystanders tried desperately to pull Danielle free from the powerful suction. Despite their efforts, they couldn't break the vacuum seal created by the drain. It took nearly 5 minutes before maintenance workers could shut down the pump system. By then, Danielle had been underwater far too long. Emergency responders performed CPR and rushed her to a nearby hospital, but the damage was irreversible. Danielle Gentile was pronounced dead from drowning. The investigation that followed revealed disturbing negligence. The 12-inch drain had been operating without its required safety cover, creating a deadly suction trap. Park maintenance records showed that the cover had been removed during routine cleaning and never properly replaced. Even more disturbing, no secondary anti-entrapment systems were in place, a basic safety feature that could have prevented this tragedy. Danielle's death sent shockwaves through the amusement park industry and led to significant changes in water attraction safety. Her parents, devastated by their loss, channeled their grief into advocacy. Their efforts, along with similar tragic cases, eventually contributed to the passage of the Virginia Graham-Baker Pool and Spa Safety Act in 2007, which mandated anti-entrapment drain covers and other safety measures in public pools and spas across the United States. Today, Danielle's story serves as a sobering reminder of the hidden dangers that can lurk in water attractions. What began as a carefree summer day ended in an unthinkable tragedy, one that could have been prevented with proper safety protocols and maintenance. Her legacy lives on in the improved safety standards that now protect countless children from suffering a similar fate. It was June 18, 2015, when 17-year-old Grayson Miller finished his shift at a local retail store and met up with 3 friends at a nearby amusement park in northern Ohio for an evening of rides. Grayson was known for his infectious enthusiasm and willingness to try anything once. The recent rain had just cleared, leaving the boardwalk glistening under the early evening lights. His companions included his cousin Tyler, a 19-year-old warehouse worker whose quiet demeanor balanced Grayson's outgoing personality, May, an 18-year-old lifeguard whose attentive nature came from watching over swimmers, and Jordan, a 17-year-old cashier whose upbeat attitude matched Grayson's energy. The group decided to start with the classic chair swing ride as a low-intensity warm-up. The vintage ride featured suspended chairs hanging from chains, with riders lifted outward by centrifugal force as the central hub rotated. They noticed one chair in the inner ring had been roped off, but the outer ring operated at full capacity. A maintenance notice indicated chain inspection had been completed the previous day. The operator announced a slightly longer cycle, and music volume was turned up high enough to mask mechanical sounds. Grayson and Jordan shared a dual seat swing in the outer ring. The seating included a lap chain and a simple secondary seat belt. The attendant performed a standard tug check before moving to the next chair. What none could detect was a microscopic crack in a chain link near the seat's clevis connection. This fatigue failure develops gradually over thousands of loading cycles, remaining invisible until catastrophic failure. As rotation began, chairs lifted outward in the familiar pattern. Speed increased toward maximum, and wind from the nearby lake pushed outer chairs to dramatic angles. The cyclical loading placed repetitive stress on every suspension component. The hidden crack propagated rapidly under cyclical stress until reaching critical size. The right side support chain failed suddenly, causing the dual seat to twist violently as the left side chain momentarily took full load of both riders. The asymmetric loading proved too much for the remaining connection. The left side S-hook, a legacy connector from the ride's original construction, deformed under extreme force and tore free from its attachment point. Both Grayson and Jordan separated simultaneously, but their trajectories diverged based on instantaneous swing position. Jordan's path carried him clear of the perimeter fence, resulting in serious but survivable injuries on grass beyond the ride area. Grayson's trajectory intersected with a decorative light pole lining the midway. The impact occurred chest first at significant velocity, followed by contact with concrete pavement below. The operator immediately engaged the emergency stop, but the rotating structure required time to decelerate safely. May quickly assisted Jordan, applying first aid while directing emergency responders to both victims. Tyler called emergency services and guided paramedics through the gathering crowd. Emergency medical services arrived within minutes and began triage. Jordan was stabilized and transported with multiple fractures but intact vital signs. Grayson had sustained fatal chest trauma, including multiple rib fractures, cardiac and pulmonary injuries, catastrophic internal bleeding, and secondary traumatic brain injury. Advanced life support protocols were initiated, but injury severity prevented circulation restoration. Grayson was pronounced dead at the scene despite the emergency team's efforts. The investigation focused on failed chain components and S-hook connector age. Metallurgical examination revealed classic fatigue failure signs, while the deformed S-hook showed gradual weakening over time. The ride was secured, and similar attractions were suspended pending comprehensive inspection. The ride dated back to the late 1980s and was still operating under older inspection standards. It was October 31, 2017, at a permanent theme park in the Los Angeles area. Evening temperatures hovered near 68 degrees as Halloween crowds filled the park's walkways, drawn by seasonal attractions operating at extended hours. One of the most heavily attended features that night was the Nightmare Maze, a temporary haunted walkthrough constructed inside an enclosed show building near the park's rear section. 28-year-old Jessica Martinez entered the park with her boyfriend shortly after sunset. She worked full-time as an emergency room nurse and had been looking forward to experiencing the park's Halloween offerings after several years of working holiday shifts. Haunted attractions were among her favorite seasonal events, and she had watched promotional videos advertising the maze's intense lighting effects, fog machines, and narrow corridors. The Nightmare Maze consisted of a winding interior path built from modular wooden walls, fabric scenery, and sound-triggered special effects. Emergency exit doors were positioned along the route. though many were visually obscured by themed decor and low-light conditions. The attraction was operating near capacity, with groups entering every few minutes to accommodate demand. Jessica and her boyfriend entered the maze with several other guests and progressed through multiple rooms without issue. Roughly 15 minutes into the attraction, a malfunction occurred inside a special effects control cabinet, supplying power to lighting and fog equipment in one section of the maze. An electrical short ignited nearby decorative material, producing smoke that quickly filled the narrow corridor. The fire itself remained localized, but smoke spread rapidly through the enclosed space. Emergency lighting activated inconsistently, leaving portions of the maze in near darkness. Guests began moving toward exits as staff initiated evacuation procedures. In the confusion, Jessica became separated from her boyfriend, while attempting to follow others toward what appeared to be an exit corridor. As smoke thickened, visibility dropped to only a few feet. Jessica moved deeper into the maze while searching for a clearly marked exit and became disoriented by the layout. Within minutes, she collapsed near a service doorway after inhaling a significant amount of smoke. Park employees located her during the evacuation and removed her from the attraction. On-site medical staff administered oxygen and basic life support until emergency responders arrived. Jessica was transported to a nearby medical center in critical condition, with signs of severe smoke inhalation and airway injury. Despite intensive treatment, including respiratory support, Jessica's condition deteriorated over the following hours. She was pronounced dead later that night due to complications from smoke inhalation and thermal injury to her respiratory tract. The subsequent investigation determined that the incident resulted from an electrical fault within the maze's effects system, combined with flammable decorative materials placed too close to power sources. Inspectors found that while the attraction met minimum seasonal installation standards, emergency exit visibility and smoke management within the enclosed structure were inadequate under real evacuation conditions. The haunted attraction was shut down immediately. Park officials removed similar seasonal installations pending safety reviews, and updated requirements were issued for electrical spacing, fire retardant materials, and exit visibility in temporary Halloween attractions. It was May 21, 2018. A large regional amusement park outside Seoul buzzed with the energy of a Friday afternoon as thousands of visitors filled its grounds. Among them was Min-Jun Lee, a 15-year-old high school freshman standing at the bumper car pavilion with 6 classmates. Min-Jun had earned a reputation at his Seoul school for fearlessness. A competitive gymnast since age 7, he specialized in rings and parallel bars, possessing exceptional upper body strength and spatial awareness. His Snapchat showcased handstand videos atop school railings, backflips off playground equipment, and daring parkour attempts through narrow alleyways. Teachers frequently reprimanded him for dangerous stunts, but classmates found his recklessness magnetic. Bumper cars are deceptively simple attractions. Electric vehicles weighing roughly 300 pounds each navigate a conductive power grid under the arena surface, with energized contact plates at speeds reaching 8 miles per hour, controlled by riders using steering wheels and accelerator pedals. The ride operates within a metal-bordered arena, approximately 40 by 50 feet, with rubber bumpers designed to absorb collision impacts. Safety regulations strictly prohibit standing, exiting vehicles during operation, or any physical contact outside the cars. Posted warnings throughout the attraction emphasize remaining seated at all times. That afternoon, Min-Jun entered a bumper car with 2 friends while 3 others occupied nearby vehicles. The ride operator, a part-time college student managing 40 simultaneous riders, activated the 5-minute session at 3:15 in the afternoon. For the first 2 minutes, Min-Jun drove normally, ramming friends and laughing. Then he stood up inside his moving car, gripping the steering column while balancing on the seat. His friends reacted with excitement over the electric buzz and collision sounds. Min-Jun indicated to his friends that he intended to swing between 2 moving cars. Nobody stopped him. No adult noticed. The operator faced away, monitoring the timer and many riders. Min-Jun positioned his car between 2 friend-driven vehicles traveling roughly parallel at 6 miles per hour. He planted 1 foot on each car's edge, releasing his original vehicle and gripping both steering columns. For several seconds, he managed to hold the position, grinning widely as they watched the stunt. His left foot slipped on the smooth metal edge. Both hands lost grip simultaneously. Min-jun dropped straight down into the small gap between the rubber bumper and the floor. His head struck the hard arena floor with devastating force. The impact was immediately incapacitating. Blood was visible on the arena floor. The operator heard screaming and hit the emergency stop within 4 seconds. All vehicles powered down, but some coasting motion continued before the cars came fully to rest. Min-jun lay motionless between 2 cars, showing signs of severe head trauma and remaining unresponsive. Park medical staff arrived within minutes, finding no pulse. More paramedics reached the scene 7 minutes later, but resuscitation attempts proved futile. The autopsy revealed catastrophic injuries. Min-jun suffered catastrophic head injuries, including skull fractures and fatal brain trauma. Death occurred within seconds of impact. The medical examiner concluded he lost consciousness immediately. The attraction was shut down pending investigation. A subsequent investigation concluded the death resulted from rider misconduct and violation of posted safety rules. No mechanical failures were identified. It was July 14, 2014, at a local water park in San Antonio, Texas. The afternoon heat pushed crowds toward water rides, where shouting, rushing water, and constant motion blended. The River Rapids attraction was known for soaking riders, not flipping rafts or trapping bodies beneath the current. Alyssa Moreno was 20, a community college student in Laredo finishing nursing prerequisites while working weekends at a daycare to cover books and fees. Friends knew her as quiet and easygoing, rarely seeking attention. That July trip was her first vacation without family, squeezed between extra shifts and a tight budget, leaving everyone tired, sunburned, and filming casually. By early afternoon, they lined up for the Rapids ride. It was a basic circular raft attraction, 6 molded seats, individual lap restraints, and water churning through concrete channels. Signs at the entrance warned riders to stay seated, keep restraints fastened, and distribute weight evenly. The operator slowed the loading process and pointed out that 3 riders were sitting on one side. He asked them to spread out properly and reminded them to keep their restraints fastened. They shifted slightly, still uneven, joked about it, and waved him off. A bystander near the railing recorded them as the raft drifted away from the platform. The raft entered the channel, spinning through shallow drops. It bumped and splashed like normal. Water flow was running at a higher setting typical for peak summer crowds, making the raft move faster through wider sections. As the ride slowed near a bend, Alyssa deliberately unbuckled her lap restraint. Ignoring the posted warnings, she stood halfway up from her seat so everyone could fit into a group selfie. One of the riders reached toward her, but she laughed and steadied herself with one hand on the raft rim. The other hand held a phone. The channel ahead widened into a straight stretch where currents crossed. The raft rotated sideways and hesitated. Other riders later said it looked wrong, like it stalled instead of spinning. The current caught the raft broadside. It snapped hard toward the outer wall and flipped without warning. All 6 riders were thrown into the water when the raft overturned. 3 surfaced right away, coughing and grabbing the concrete edge. 2 others broke free moments later and pulled themselves toward the side. Alyssa did not come back up. The raft settled low in the channel, held down by the force of the moving water, its underside pressed flat against the floor. Investigators found the raft turned sideways and lodged in a widened channel, where uneven water pressure built beneath it. High flow, uneven weight, and a disengaged lap restraint caused it to flip and stay pinned. Witnesses saw Alyssa's arms stop moving first. Operators cut power, but the water pressure eased seconds too late. Alyssa surfaced unresponsive. Lifeguards pulled them out and called for help. Paramedics arrived in about 7 minutes, attempted CPR, and continued resuscitation during transport. Alyssa was pronounced dead shortly after reaching the hospital. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as drowning. Her lungs were filled with water. Bruising across her chest and shoulders showed sustained pressure, consistent with being pinned underwater. There were no fatal head injuries or internal damage. Loss of consciousness was attributed to oxygen deprivation. The death was ruled accidental. The ride was shut down and modified weeks later. Alyssa's daycare closed for a day so co-workers could attend her funeral. Her nursing books were donated to a local scholarship fund. It was August 9th, 2016. The morning air at the mountain resort in Shizuoka Prefecture was humid and still, with temperatures already climbing toward 85 degrees. Ryo Tanaka, a 27-year-old contract IT worker from Tokyo. Ryo was a programmer for a mid-tier software company, but weekends transformed him into something different. For 3 years, he'd been obsessed with capturing POV footage from roller coasters, despite having fewer than 200 followers on his video channel. Friends described him as cautious at work, but increasingly reckless during leisure time, often ignoring posted safety rules to get better camera angles. Roller coasters subject riders to forces exceeding 4 Gs while traveling at speeds up to 80 miles per hour through inversions, drops, and sharp turns designed to push human tolerance limits. Modern safety systems include multiple restraint mechanisms, height restrictions, and strict policies prohibiting loose articles. That morning, he'd concealed a collapsible metal selfie stick inside his jacket sleeve, securing it with electrical tape to avoid detection during bag checks. The hypercoaster's 200-foot first drop was exactly what Ryo wanted for his footage. Security footage later revealed him collapsing the telescoping stick to approximately 18 inches and taping it along his forearm before entering the station. Ride attendants conducted standard visual safety checks, confirming his over-the-shoulder restraints were properly secured. Multiple witnesses seated behind him recalled Ryo shifting repeatedly in his seat, appearing to adjust something inside his jacket as the train climbed the lift hill. At the peak, 200 feet above ground, Ryo prepared for his stunt. As the train crested and began its 80-mile-per-hour descent, he forcefully extended the selfie stick sideways to capture the drop. The metal shaft immediately struck a fixed steel support beam during the initial acceleration phase. The sudden impact violently wrenched his extended arm backward, causing a catastrophic shoulder dislocation. The selfie stick snapped at its telescoping joint, and the fractured end whipped backward, striking Ryo along the side of the neck and lower jaw with blunt force. The secondary impact fractured cervical vertebrae and lacerated major blood vessels, leading to rapid and uncontrolled bleeding. Blood spread across the seat, restraints, and nearby riders as Ryo slumped forward, losing consciousness within seconds. The automated train continued its programmed cycle, while passengers screamed in horror. Emergency crews reached the station within 4 minutes of the train's return, but Ryo had already died from massive blood loss and neurological trauma. The coroner determined death resulted from catastrophic blunt force neck trauma, vascular rupture, and severe orthopedic injuries to the shoulder and arm, leading to rapid hemorrhage and loss of consciousness. The park immediately implemented enhanced physical screening of riders, targeted metal detection checks during peak periods, and revised staff training focused on identifying concealed objects. It was June 2, 1997. Quimby Galati was a bright, ambitious young woman just days away from her high school graduation. That day, Quimby and her fellow Napa High School seniors were visiting Waterworld USA, a water park in Concord, California, when the unimaginable happened, forever changing the lives of the teenagers. At 18 years old, Quimby Galati was a model student known for her vivacious personality, her involvement in the school's mock trial club, and her dedication to academic excellence. Like many of her classmates, Quimby was excited to celebrate the last days of high school with her peers before embarking on the next chapter of her life. That day at Waterworld was part of the traditional senior trip, a long-awaited event filled with anticipation. She and her classmates, along with chaperones, had boarded buses early that morning, eager to make memories before graduation, which was just days away. Waterworld USA, now known as Six Flags Hurricane Harbor Concord, was a relatively new water park, having opened just 2 years prior. The park was known for its towering slides and thrilling water attractions, and Napa High students had chosen it specifically for the excitement it promised. Among its many rides, the Bonsai Pipeline stood out, a tall, open-air water slide that had become iconic for its steep drops and fast twists. With the excitement of the day also came a tradition. For years, Napa High seniors had clogged the water slides on their annual trip, a practice in which groups of students would pack the slides and go down in large numbers, defying safety rules in pursuit of fun. It was a well-known ritual, and this year's graduating class had grand plans. Whispers among the students suggested that more than 70 of them wanted to take part in clogging the Banzai pipeline. Even though it was a risky stunt, most were eager to participate, seeking to end their senior year with a bang. As the day drew to a close, the park announced over the loudspeakers that it was time for the Napa High group to head back to their buses. Instead of leaving, dozens of students rushed to the Banzai pipeline. Quimby, like many of her friends, was among them. Along with 32 other students, she climbed to the top of the slide, where a lifeguard was stationed to ensure safety. However, the group pushed past the lifeguard, determined to carry out their plan. The lifeguard blew her whistle and shouted, but it was too late. 33 students piled onto the slide at once. Moments later, disaster struck. The weight of the students proved too much for the slide structure, and it began to buckle. The fiberglass cracked under the pressure, and in a matter of seconds, the section of the slide that held the most students collapsed. The teenagers were thrown 40 feet to the ground below, some hitting the wooden support beams on their way down. Chaos ensued. Park goers watched in horror as bodies fell from the sky, some landing on concrete, others in shallow water, bushes, or against each other. Some were more fortunate than others. Many suffered broken bones and internal injuries, but one student would not survive. Quimby Gilati, the bright and promising 18-year-old, suffered catastrophic injuries to her head and chest after striking a support beam. Despite efforts to save her, she died from her injuries 45 minutes after the accident. The other injured students were rushed to nearby hospitals, and many would recover, but Quimby's death left a mark on her classmates and community. Napa High School's graduation ceremony, held just 10 days after the accident, was a somber affair. Some students attended in wheelchairs, while first responders and medical staff were invited to honor the lives affected by the tragedy. But Quimby Gilati wasn't there to graduate. Lawsuits followed, including a wrongful death suit filed by Quimby's father, Larry Gilati, who sought justice for the loss of his daughter. In the end, Quimby's family settled for $1.7 million, the largest of all the settlements related to the accident. Napa High School also established the Quimby Gilati Memorial Scholarship Assembly to provide financial aid and guidance to future students. The tragedy at Waterworld USA led to significant changes in water park safety regulations across the country. The Banzai pipeline was permanently closed, and parks nationwide implemented stricter capacity limits and more rigorous enforcement of safety rules. The practice of clogging slides, once seen as a harmless senior prank, was recognized for the deadly risk it truly posed. For the Napa High School class of 1997, what should have been a joyous celebration of their achievements became a life-altering tragedy. The empty chair at graduation, meant for Quimby, served as a stark reminder of how quickly life can change. Her classmates, who had planned to embark on their adult lives together, instead found themselves grappling with grief, survivor's guilt, and the harsh reality that actions have consequences. Today, more than 2 decades later, Quimby Gilati's memory lives on through the scholarship in her name and in the hearts of those who knew her. Her tragic death stands as a sobering reminder of the importance of safety regulations and the devastating cost when they are ignored. What began as a day of celebration ended in heartbreak. A promising young life cut short in the pursuit of one final high school thrill. It was October 12th, 2016, at a permanent amusement park in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. The early evening air hovered at a comfortable 72 degrees as families filled the midway during one of the park's busiest fall weekends. Decorative lights illuminated the rides as sunset approached, and the slow rotation of a large observation wheel offered elevated views of the park and surrounding city. 67-year-old Harold Williams entered the park with his wife, Margaret, as part of a long-standing tradition they had maintained throughout their marriage. Recently retired after 4 decades as an elementary school teacher, Harold had been adjusting to a quieter routine and welcomed outings that allowed him to reconnect with familiar comforts. The couple had ridden observation wheels together for years, though Harold had grown increasingly uneasy with heights following a household fall several years earlier. Despite his anxiety, Harold agreed to ride. The observation wheel stood just over 150 feet tall and featured enclosed gondolas designed to remain upright as the wheel rotated. Each car was equipped with a manually latched door and a secondary internal safety bar. Riders were instructed to remain seated and keep the door secured for the duration of the ride. As the wheel completed its first rotation, Harold appeared tense but calm. On the second ascent, as the gondola approached its highest point, he began experiencing visible distress. Margaret later reported that his breathing became labored and his posture rigid. At the peak of the ride, Harold attempted to stand, possibly believing the gondola had stopped. In doing so, he placed his weight against the door. The latch, designed to prevent accidental opening but not intended to withstand full body pressure, shifted under the load. The door opened several inches, enough to compromise Harold's balance. Margaret reached for him, but the confined space and sudden movement made it impossible to stop what followed. Harold fell forward through the partially opened doorway, dropping approximately 140 feet onto a restricted service area beneath the wheel. The impact caused catastrophic injuries incompatible with life. Ride operators halted the wheel immediately after witnesses below alerted staff. Emergency responders arrived within minutes and confirmed Harold had died at the scene due to massive blunt force trauma. Margaret was treated for shock and transported to a nearby hospital. The investigation determined that the gondola door latch met minimum operational standards, but lacked a reinforced secondary locking mechanism capable of resisting sustained force from a standing adult. Inspectors noted that while riders were instructed to remain seated, the design did not adequately account for medical distress or panic-induced movement at elevation. Authorities concluded the death was accidental. The observation wheel was shut down temporarily while additional internal restraints and reinforced door latches were installed across all gondolas. Updated procedures were also implemented, requiring operators to visually confirm that riders remained seated before each rotation continued. The park reopened the ride several weeks later under revised safety guidelines. Harold's death was cited in internal safety briefings as a case where mechanical compliance alone was insufficient to prevent a fatal outcome without accounting for human behavior under stress. It was August 3, 2014. The California afternoon sun beat down on a packed regional theme park where the screams of thrill-seekers mixed with carnival music. Ethan Marks, a 16-year-old from Anaheim, stood at the base of the Titan drop coaster, eyeing the 180-foot vertical climb. What should have been an ordinary summer day would end with paramedics arriving to a scene of catastrophic trauma. Ethan wasn't a troubled kid. He maintained a 3.8 GPA at his high school and volunteered at a local animal shelter. But he was obsessed with building his social media following. He'd gained a few hundred followers by photographing himself dangling from freeway overpasses and balanced on building ledges. His parents said that they knew about the account, but dismissed it as typical teenage attention-seeking. Theme park safety relies on multiple layers of protection, including restraint harnesses engineered to withstand extreme forces, surveillance cameras, and physical barriers designed to keep guests away from ride structures. Warning signs plastered every surface near restricted areas, clearly stating that climbing on rides resulted in immediate ejection and criminal trespassing charges. His friends said that he'd scouted the coaster for weeks, noticing that during loading sequences, cars sometimes remained paused at the apex, creating what he believed was enough time for a photo. That afternoon, Ethan separated from his friends, approaching the ride's exit pathway, where metal fencing created a barrier between guests and the ride's structural supports. Two staff members were managing the loading platform 200 feet away. Ethan scaled the 6-foot chain-link fence, his phone clutched in one hand. He'd waited until a gate to a service pathway sat momentarily ajar, allowing him to bypass the normal barriers. 3 witnesses later reported seeing him climb the steel lattice framework supporting the track, moving with alarming speed toward the paused coaster car at the summit. A control room attendant glimpsed the climb on a camera feed and radioed the operator, who engaged the ride's emergency stop. The train remained locked at a block break at the apex. There was no safe, rapid procedure to retrieve someone hanging outside the restraints. Staff attempted to alert him from below, but the distance and ambient noise made communication ineffective. Ethan's friends watched from a distance, seeing him on the structure as he reached the coaster car side, approximately 180 feet above concrete maintenance pits. Positioning himself on the narrow maintenance catwalk beside the frozen coaster, Ethan leaned beyond the guardrail to frame the selfie. His sneaker lost traction on the narrow metal surface of the catwalk. His body twisted sideways, phone clattering away as both hands grasped for the railing. He caught it briefly, but momentum carried him backward. He fell from the structure before striking lower support beams. His body struck a horizontal steel crossbeam approximately 60 feet below. His body cartwheeled, striking 2 more support structures before landing face down in a maintenance pit containing hydraulic equipment. A ride operator called emergency services, and paramedics arrived within minutes but only pronounced Ethan dead at the scene. The county coroner listed cause of death as blunt force trauma due to a high-energy fall, with severe head trauma and fatal spinal injuries. Ethan's funeral drew attendees that included classmates who were with him at the park. The park permanently installed 12-foot fencing and increased security patrols. A subsequent investigation determined the ride had been functioning normally, and that the death resulted from unauthorized access to restricted infrastructure. No mechanical faults were identified, and the case was closed as a fatal trespassing incident. It was September 9th, 2017, at a regional amusement park outside Bengaluru, India, where a company outing packed the grounds as heat lingered and high-intensity rides dispatched full seats non-stop. Rohit Malhotra, 29, worked in mobile phone retail in Bengaluru, handling warranty issues and customer complaints through long, crowded shifts. He lived at home, helped with expenses, and set aside small savings for a future business course. His heavier build often made restraint checks difficult on high-intensity rides, something he had encountered before but usually laughed off. During a company outing to the park, Rohit decided he wanted to ride one of the thrill attractions. When he was seated on the pendulum ride, the restraint indicator stayed red, signaling an improper fit due to load limits. The operator told him to exit. With co-workers watching and the ride moments from dispatch, Rohit argued to try again, unwilling to step away and be singled out. After stepping back into the seat, Rohit adjusted himself repeatedly. Surveillance footage later showed him forcing the shoulder restraint down hard until it clicked once. The harness appeared secure, but it had only partially engaged and was not fully locked into position. The operator performed a visual check, saw the green indicator and the harness sitting down on his shoulders, and cleared the seat for dispatch. Rohit settled back into the seat as the cycle began. The ride launched immediately. It was one of the park's most aggressive attractions, swinging riders more than 100 feet while inverting them repeatedly. The restraint system depended on precise sensor calibration and full locking engagement. Because Rohit had forced the harness into a false partial lock rather than achieving a proper fit, the restraint was not fully engaged. It sat high on his shoulders, leaving excess vertical space. As the pendulum gained speed, centrifugal force lifted Rohit's body upward. On the first full rise, the restraint shifted instead of holding firm. His hips lifted above the seat edge. When the ride inverted, gravity pulled his upper body through the gap beneath the harness. By the peak of the swing, his legs cleared the seat entirely, and he slipped free. Rohit was ejected feet first, then rotated backward by the momentum of the arm. He struck a fixed steel maintenance stair platform positioned beneath the ride's swing path. His head hit the metal edge at speed, producing a sharp impact heard across the ride area. His body fell to the concrete below and remained motionless. Blood spread quickly beneath his head and along the base of the stairs. The ride continued its programmed cycle for roughly 40 seconds, gradually slowing rather than stopping abruptly. Riders screamed as they passed overhead, clearly seeing Rohit's body below. Staff activated the emergency stop, which reduced power but did not halt the ride instantly, consistent with pendulum ride design. Security pushed back onlookers and sealed the area. Medical staff reached Rohit within minutes. He was unresponsive, with visible skull fractures and massive bleeding. There was no pulse or breathing. Paramedics arrived approximately 7 minutes later and pronounced him dead at the scene. The post-mortem listed catastrophic blunt force head trauma as the cause of death. The skull fractures caused immediate brain failure, making survival impossible. No alcohol or drugs were present. The restraint showed incomplete locking. Video evidence confirmed deliberate forcing of the restraint into a partial lock before dispatch. Investigators cited unsafe rider interference with the restraint system as the primary factor. Rohit's parents later filed a civil case against the park. It was July 27, 2015. The afternoon crowds at a seaside amusement pier in southern England moved lazily between game stalls and food vendors, the summer heat making everyone sluggish except for 2 teenage workers who had clocked out early. Callum Johnson Reed, 18, and Josh Jefferson, 17, stood beneath the towering Ferris wheel, plotting their next stunt in what would become their final act of reckless bravado. Callum worked the ring toss booth, while Josh operated the bumper cars, both earning minimum wage through a seasonal employment agency that staffed the pier's attractions. Friends described them as inseparable troublemakers who treated their summer jobs as extended opportunities for dangerous pranks. They'd been caught sneaking onto rides after hours, climbing restricted areas of roller coasters, and performing increasingly risky stunts. Ferris wheels operate as massive rotating structures reaching heights of roughly 130 to 160 feet, with passenger gondolas suspended from the outer rim that rely on primary mechanical latches backed by gravity and secondary safety catches, designed for slow, methodical rotation that typically takes 10 to 12 minutes per cycle. The pier's Ferris wheel had been experiencing mechanical issues all summer. Maintenance logs showed repeated complaints about a stiff and partially misaligned gondola door latch, particularly on Gondola 7. Staff had reported the problem to management 3 times in the past month, but repairs were repeatedly delayed due to cost concerns and the busy summer season. The wheel continued operating with a posted warning for riders to ensure doors were properly secured, rather than removing the gondola from service, which violated internal maintenance recommendations. That afternoon, Callum and Josh decided to ride the wheel during their break, specifically requesting Gondola 7 because they knew about the faulty latch. Security cameras covering the loading platform and lower support structure captured them entering the gondola at 2:45 p.m., leaning their combined weight repeatedly against the door, an action subtle enough to avoid immediate operator intervention. Other riders in nearby gondolas later reported hearing loud banging and shouting from their direction. At the wheel's highest point, approximately 90 to 100 feet above the pier, their repeated leaning finally overcame the compromised latch, allowing the door to swing partially open. The sudden shift in balance caused both teenagers to stumble forward. Security footage shows Josh losing his footing first and falling cleanly through the opening, while Callum became momentarily caught on the doorframe as he followed. Josh struck the pavement after a roughly 3-second fall, dying instantly. Callum's fall was interrupted when his loose hoodie snagged on a fixed structural bracket near the gondola's mounting arm, pinning his upper torso and compressing his neck and chest. Witnesses watched in horror as he struggled briefly, his body partially suspended and pressed against the metal framework, while the wheel continued moving only a few feet before the operator initiated an emergency stop. His movements weakened rapidly, ceasing within 30 to 45 seconds as oxygen deprivation set in. The ride operator, alerted by screaming bystanders and abnormal gondola movement, stopped the wheel and called emergency services. Rescue teams arrived within 6 minutes, but required specialized equipment to reach Callum's body safely. Josh was pronounced dead at the scene from massive blunt force trauma and multiple fractures. Callum died from compressive asphyxia involving neck and upper chest compression, the medical examiner confirming rapid loss of consciousness consistent with restricted airflow and blood flow. The pier immediately closed the Ferris wheel and removed Gondola 7 from service, later eliminating the exposed structural bracket and replacing all door latch assemblies. Callum's parents filed a civil claim for damages after maintenance records revealed the known latch defects. The case resulted in a substantial settlement, regulatory fines, and mandatory third-party safety audits, with expanded shutdown authority granted to maintenance staff across all pier attractions.